Hello, my friends. This is Lynda Lippin, and welcome to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Hello, everybody. This is Lynda Lippin here for episode 4 of the Pilates Goddess podcast. And today I have a special guest, Joan Breibart from the PhysicalMind Institute. Hi, Joan.
Hi, Lynda.
So, Joan, you and I have been talking a lot recently about the state of Pilates, and that really Pilates is at a huge crossroads right now, and people don't seem to see that.
Well, I think one of the reasons is that although we talk about a Pilates community, the individual person, even a studio owner, is just in a tiny, tiny world. I think that's why in the past, but no longer, obviously, PMA was sought after because then they could all come together. But just like our conversation where you mentioned, well, there's probably 50,000. I said there's at least 500,000, maybe more. And I just told you about this Chinese guy who's apparently trained 200,000. So it is all over the globe. There's a lot of people who've taken a Pilates certification course and they're just focused on what they should do from what they learned in the course, as opposed to looking at the changing, particularly for the United States, the changing body. So if a Joe were here, he would be focusing on, oh, the bodies have changed and people's lifestyles are different and military service is not compulsory and women are not walking around in high heels and girdles. And he would have changed things. But when you've taken an expensive certification that's taken you a long time to complete, you're really just focused on, I want to practice this with clients. And that's often why people ask me, because I'm always looking at least 1 billion bodies, and there are 8 billion, so only 1 billion. But I'm not in a studio every day dealing with my 4 clients.
Right. And, you've been in this business for a very long time. And I've been in this business for 33 years. You've been in this business much longer than I have. And now people actually know what Pilates is. When I first started teaching Pilates, nobody knew what it was. Like, people would just come in and ogle over the equipment. No one knew what the 100 was. People still thought, I think that the fitness folks were still saying that doing a full sit-up was a horrible thing for the spine. So,
Yes, I mean, it's interesting what you're saying. And I can remember when I was in an elevator in New York City in 2001, and I heard people talking about their Pilates class. And I thought, wow, it's just as if they're just talking about gym or, doing some sport that everyone has known about. So, but remember what I've said. And I think, Zoe Stein-Pierce said it better than I can way back in the 90s when there was all this publicity, which was very critical for the winning the lawsuit on the trademark, on the name. She said an article would be published, and she's in Dallas, Texas. It didn't matter. It could be published in USA Today. All of a sudden, the phones would start ringing at 7 a.m. And if you didn't answer the call or get back to the caller, they would call you again at 10 a.m. I mean, because this was the new miracle. Remember, the whole fitness thing started, and diet, in the late 60s. And by the time 1991 came around, when I launched the Institute for the Pilates Method, people had done that. They had done all this exercise and dieting, and they weren't in good shape. Then overall, they were 20 pounds heavier, and they were injured. And so all of a sudden, there was Pilates. The Pilates pilots couldn't even pronounce it, but they thought, oh, there is magic. This is the real magic. We just didn't know about it. But all those celebrities were so beautiful. They were doing that, not what we were doing, right? And of course, all of that is gone. And I think that Karen Madison said it, and she was a really early one. She was certified at St. Francis in 1989. She said when she started to teach, and she had the first and the largest studio in the Bay Area, which is a great market, everything I did was novel. No one had ever heard of the 100 or the teaser, if it was an appetizer, right? So people were so eager. And now all Pilates teachers and fitness teachers and yoga and bar and anything you might name know that even if it's not spelled out that there are only 10 movements, the clients and of course all the trainers know this. And so the novelty is gone. And that is something we should really discuss as opposed to what people are doing, which is fighting over some photos of Joe, right? That's what they're putting their group effort into, fighting with Sean Gallagher over some photos. And he may be right, or they may be right. It doesn't matter. You don't want to get in a lawsuit. It was horrendous. Everybody, like me, I was the first one sued, 1994, by Romana and Gallagher. But it hadn't started yet, Pilates. So we were sued and we had to respond. But now it's here. It's at a crossroads and people need to figure out how to expand, how to make it work, how to keep it going.
Right. So instead of it, and I kind of want to back up for one moment, just for any listener who doesn't kind of know any of the history, but in the 90s, Sean Gallagher was a physical therapist based in New York, bought the Pilates estate, including the trademark.
Right.
And instead, and you and I have talked about this, instead of doing what would have been, we both agree, the smarter move, which would have been to send a welcoming letter to all of the 500 people who were teaching Pilates at the time, maybe, saying, hey, I bought this, I've got the estate and the trademark, I've got all of this great Joseph Pilates historical stuff. And I'd really kind of like to just welcome you all in and, collect a little fee and have us all work under the same kind of banner. He instead chose to send out cease and desist letters and start suing people. There was a whole decade there where we just all said we were teaching exercises based on the work of Joseph Pilates.
Yes, except for the few that were certified by Romana. I mean, it wasn't a real certification, but whatever.
And not even all of them, because, several of those teachers also didn't agree with Sean busting in and doing that and continued to teach classical Pilates, but again, didn't call it Pilates.
Yeah. Well, of course, there's no such thing as classical Pilates. I mean, that was invented on October 19th, 2000, when the Pilates trademark was canceled, which is such a rare event that if you meet a lawyer and their intellectual property, they want to talk to you about this. I mean, it doesn't happen. The U.S. government does not cancel a trademark, especially one that had been on the register for 10 years. This is a monumental achievement, but it's irrelevant.
That's why the decision is on Harvard's website.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ken is now, and this is great, Ken Endelman of Balanced Body is going to digitize all of the publicity. And I have to say, most of it I initiated. But regardless, it's what Judge Cedarbaum in the Southern District Court, and she died only a few years ago.
Yeah.
But she had six books of Xeroxed articles. And they were the size of what the New York City phone book used to be like, which was a foot high, right? But whatever it is, all that will be available. It's important because people need to understand how this all came about. And it wasn't because of master teachers. In fact, those people I had on the advisory board, obviously Eve and Carola and Ron and the rest of them, Kathy, they barely knew what was happening. And they didn't understand at all what was driving Pilates. But anyway, that's the past. And I'm in a position where as you know, tried to emulate Joe Pilates. And that does not mean teaching teaser perfectly, right? It means looking at bodies, looking at the economy, looking at the fact that it is not just a few studios in the US. I mean, in China, they're not going to be able to have, a whole room of reformers and Cadillacs and chairs and barrels and all the rest of that. So trying to come up with inventions, which is what Joe did. And most Pilates teachers have never, ever invented anything. They haven't even thought about something they might invent. So they're unfamiliar with what this man did, and which is really incredible. And it wasn't just the universal reformer, which he patented. Every one of his inventions could have been patented, but he ran out of money, obviously, and it's an incredible amount of work, intellectual work, and having to pay all these legal fees and dealing with the patent office. And but every one of them could, if he had patented the magic circle, Suzanne Summers and friends wouldn't have ripped it off as the thigh master, right? So
Exactly.
that is the important thing. And if you have never invented something, in other words, you get an idea and it doesn't exist, or you think it doesn't exist, you may find out later that it does, and then that idea isn't any good because the patent office, will not, they will not work with you. But if it is something that is new, novel, it's 5 years to get a patent, and it's just exhausting and time consuming in the way that you can't think of almost anything else. So, that's what people should be in awe of. Not the fact that he came up with these exercises, because he, being a big thinker, someone who connects the dots, not a onesie-twosie person, not an introvert, understood that whether you called it yoga or gymnastics or Pilates, which was contrology, or whatever, there were really only 10 spinal movements, and the rest is just choreography and some names. He understood that. You would hope at this point that almost all Pilates teachers would understand it, because the public is coming to understand it.
Well, right. Because that's when they're doing some of the wall exercises, say, and they're doing a wall slide or a wall squat, and they're like, how is this Pilates?
Yeah, right. And
I've also had that happen online. Right. Where they're like, oh, there's standing footwork, there's squatting in Pilates. We had no idea. I also wanted to touch on the kind of current legal situation, because before I spoke to you, my kind of gut instinctual response was, oh, someone's fighting Sean Gallagher again. I'm going to get on board with that.
Yeah, I remember that.
And now, so the issue now for anyone listening who doesn't know is that because Sean Gallagher did buy the estate, which included, Joseph Pilates' house in Beckett and a whole lot of records and paperwork and photos, there happen to be some photos that people believe are in the public domain and may even be marked as public domain, in Google, but that he owns or may own. We don't know. And as people are posting these photos online on their Instagram and other places, he and his friends are seeing them, and they are reporting the accounts and often having the accounts taken down.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why today, and it wasn't when we had the lawsuit over the name, people need to avoid any activity that will lead to this, because the tech firms are petrified, these gigantic firms, of any legal thing. We have, PhysicalMind has 2 apps. One is Ty4 and the other is 80 Bytes, both free. And we've had a whole series of communications with Apple. We could have had it with Google and Android, about wanting to change a name. And it's as if we are wanting to change the Constitution of the United States. It's been taken so seriously. Now, it will happen, but you just understand that they are very, very concerned about violating something. And so you have an Instagram account and you put up a picture of Joe's commando exercise, where he's lying there and there's all these different moves, and you change it, or you put your picture in, or you just put that old one. You're going to have one of these big tech companies, it could be Facebook, Instagram, or it could be TikTok, whatever, take it down. And they're going to take your social media down. And then if you get it back up, it won't be the same. It's just dangerous. But it's also misplaced. Why do people need to put up these old photos of Joe? I mean, I have one hanging over my desk from 1958 at the Sheraton Hotel, which was a testimonial to Joe and Clara. And I don't know, there must be 100 people sitting around these huge tables, and it's so charming, and they're all dressed in suits and dresses, and everyone looks so different than they would look now. And I love to look at it, but I'm not going to post it on our Instagram.
Right. And the question is it really the time right now when 25% of the Pilates studios in the US have closed to be focused time, money, and energy wise really on the past?
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Yes, to focus on the past. It's not really a tribute to Joe. I think people feel that they want to honor him, and they should, because he was so prolific and so creative and so far ahead of his time. But his time is now, and because there are so many other events happening in the world, obviously the obesity epidemic, and of course, in war, inflation, whatever, people have to have a bigger view of where Pilates is, where does it fit in, how many flavors of it do we need. We see the success of Club Pilates. A lot of people feel that is not positive, but no one really knows. We just know that a lot of people are certified. A lot of consumers need this work. It's just vast. There's a lot of meat on those bones. And if you're not using a reformer, because you can't even buy one now, it's because of all of this supply stuff, you still can be giving people the essence which they need. Even if they use it on a Peloton bike, they're still using Pilates.
Exactly. And I remember pre-lawsuit, we all just accepted the fact that there were different flavors of Pilates. Remember, there was slightly different choreography.
Yeah.
From different places. There was East Coast, West Coast. There was Canada.
Right. Yeah. And it was different in Australia and England. Remember, of course, we're talking about a tiny, tiny number, but it was different. And when we had that first certifying studio transmittal, which was September 1992, I remember saying to Michelle Larson, I'll bet you $20 that these Australians do not show up, because 5 of them had registered, right? And they all showed up, and I couldn't even comprehend it. But they were so hungry for some kind of an official direction, right? They all knew what they knew, but they didn't know what percentage of the total was what they knew, and that made them insecure. And so that was important at that time. But now people understand that the way we had to express the difference between Pilates and just regular fitness, calisthenics, whatever you want to call it, that's the most important thing, that we approached a body differently. Just the breath alone, using the breath alone, was not something that the other types did. So people are aware of that now. They know what they know. They know that there's so much meat there. They can be creative. And so going back to a picture of this man who was as much of an inventor that he was also fabulous for promotion. He was really great. I mean, you know my story. I really learned about Pilates when I was working at Scholastic Magazines and Books, my first job, 1963. And I believe it was Life magazine, of course, doesn't exist. And there was a big article about it. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. But the only reason as a 22-year-old I thought it was interesting is that all my life, my short life at that point, 22 years, my father had told me that I'm related to the strong man of Europe who died in the 30s, whose name was Sigmund Breibart. And of course, his stage name was Samson. And then I started to do research, and I realized, I didn't do the research many years later when there was the internet, that obviously my ancestor, Samson, had to know Joe because they both came to New York at the exact same time. So it was all interesting to me intellectually. But when I started, and I really started with Corolla and then went to Pilates Studio, it wasn't something that I had a lot of options. There wasn't really an exercise business. That's, again, hard for people to understand. But whatever it was that happened to me personally, I always saw right from the start, when I started to try things, when things came out. I remember when I went running. My husband was, like Mercury. He could run. I couldn't run too well. But I started all the different things and the aerobic dancing and whatever. And of course, I always stuck with Pilates. And I really think that I stuck with it because it was more sophisticated, more interesting. I didn't get bored. And now at age 81, I will say that probably my biggest benefit has come from what it's done to keep my brain active, because complex movement is something that requires a lot of brain activity. And so it's not just the body, it's the brain. And as you get older, you have to pay as much attention to your brain as your body. And that's why there's so much for people who are knowledgeable professionals, certified Pilates teachers to do and to help people. And we need to be focused on that and not going back to when Joe was in a photograph and what that period looked like, because we're not in that period today.
Right. And, you've patented what, 9?
Yeah. And and it's funny because I said a year ago, I'm not going to invent anything anymore. That's what I said. Because
I remember that.
Right. It's just too much.
And you did.
Fence and whatever. And then we have a wonderful employee who's very young, 23. And of course, she's up to date on everything tech. She grew up with an iPad in her crib. And so when I told her about this idea, and I had it 3 years before, but I couldn't get anyone to help me make a prototype. And that's the fact that Joe could do that is just a miracle. And I just couldn't get it together, right? It was in my head, but I have to have a physical thing. And she came up with the idea of trying it with 3D printing, which I hadn't even thought about. And immediately, of course, we've got a sample and then we have to change it. And, there's a long process. But now it's going to be called Reflex It. And we trademarked the name and we filed a patent on this new invention that I said I would not invent anymore. And what Joe did, so many brilliant inventions. It was he couldn't stop himself, and I couldn't stop myself. You say, oh, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to focus on just getting what I've invented to be well known. And instead, really, I think back now when I understand how complicated things are for people out there. If Joe had only invented the universal reformer, which he patented, and come up with 25 exercises, just 25, only on that wonderful piece of apparatus, he would not have died. I don't believe, even though he was so ahead, he wouldn't have died broke and angry and miserable and everything that was not good. He would not have. He would have been able to get people to say, oh, and they'd finally relate to that. But instead, he went on and on and on and on, and we're all we are all grateful, of course, that he did that. But in his lifetime, having all of these inventions and every one of them being unique and novel and patentable, even though he didn't, we benefit.
Oh, sure we do. And we benefit from all of from all of his ideas. And I think that it's, crucially important for all Pilates professionals to really be looking ahead and seeing what's coming up next and what can we be doing that's going to be helping our clients. And that doesn't involve, $5,000 pieces, large pieces of equipment.
And he would agree with that because he would have seen, I mean, remember, it was the number of places where Pilates existed in the 60s, you could put in your eye and you wouldn't feel it. But he would have come up with new inventions that would serve people where they would be lightweight and mobile and inexpensive, for sure. I mean, because he was looking at bodies and he was looking at the culture, right? And that's why he, was so prolific, because he had a big picture, right? And I know that it seems wonderful for people to join together and have a battle. I mean, Michelle Larson said this. That's what helped grow Pilates in the 90s, was that there was so much energy, but it had to be because of a lawsuit. But now we should put the energy into looking at where we are and where we should be going. And, it's at a crossroads, but I really believe all exercise is. And we know diets are dead. So it's a good time to reflect and come together with ideas and trying things, rather than taking old photos and finding yourself in trouble with the big tech firms where you can't paddle them, right? If they take down your Instagram account, you can't go and say, put it back.
No, you can't, because they won't.
Yeah.
They'll just make you start a new one. We need to
be thinking as a group and recognizing, hey, are there 200,000 Pilates teachers in China? I mean, I was amazed that I was just invited to a conference there, but it's going to be virtual online. Anyway, and that was the number cited. So we took something that was unknown, unpronounceable, no one liked. I mean, I think that's an important thing. I mean, of course, to me, the universal reformer is the best machine ever created. But when we started it, and we were in Santa Fe, as you know, and it was a place everyone wanted to visit. It was the hip place then. And they'd read about it and they came over to the Institute. They didn't even want to get on the reformer. And when they were on it, they didn't like it. People cannot understand that. And they said, oh, this is a contraption and it's cumbersome and it's complicated. They did not like it. So that's what people have to understand. This has taken time to get to where it is, and now we have to move it forward.
Yes. And moving it forward means doing things that are looking ahead and not focusing solely on the past or what we think was taken away from us, because we've got so much that we have, right? In terms of knowing the body.
Exactly. And
that's really what Pilates
have
teaches.
The concepts that he understood before anyone about how you work the body, and what it means to be focusing on the stability and proprioception and body awareness. Nobody even knew any of that stuff. So we're here. It's now, and we should get into a little snit here over Sean Gallagher and some photos, because it won't lead us to where we should be.
Yes, I agree. I've even said, and I said it in my last podcast, that, Joe would have embraced the less expensive, easy to use, easy to carry things that we have available now. Sure. That happen to work a lot like springs. The bungee cords on the Tie 4. Right. And I remember your mini reformer, because I had clients
ultimately
who
Sean Gallagher ended up owning, in a sense, not owning the patent. Of course, he can't own my patent, but in sense of getting all the money that it made on ultimately after the infomercial on QVC. And that's what fueled and funded his lawsuits. So he didn't really, I mean, in a way, he helped Pilates grow. Sounds strange to say that, but if he had done what you mentioned in the beginning, just grandfathered in a few of them and then had a trademark that, and everybody would have wanted it, really. He would have controlled the industry. That's true. It would have been narrower. But the fact is, because he didn't do that, we have so many different flavors, and we need to honor them and those people.
Yes. And I think it's time also to just that everyone has to stop with the fighting. I think people need to understand that the categories of classical and contemporary were invented.
Right.
And they were invented after the lawsuit.
Right. Exactly.
And that there are classical and contemporary teachers on both sides of the lawsuit, interestingly enough. And there are some of us like myself who are both classical and contemporary.
Well,
because
or
I just teach Pilates.
Neither. Right. They're just names.
Or neither.
They're names.
Yeah.
Right. They're
exactly.
Names, really. And
that's what we need to do. We need to focus on our clients. We need to focus on the work and getting the work out there so that people feel and function better.
That's it. And we can do it. So let's move ahead on that ending note.
We can do it. And let's move ahead on that. Now, Joan, if people wish to get in touch with you, they can just go to the website.
Right.
PhysicalMindInstitute.com.
Yeah. And there's, they can sign up for our newsletter. That's easy, of course. And strangely, though apparently the open read rate in the fitness industry is, I think, 18 or 19%. Ours is 46 every time we send one out. And I don't believe it, but we do have something to say. And we're always focused on how to get teachers and studios to be more successful. So that's it. And then, of course, if they respond to info or have a question, it goes directly to me. So I'd be happy to talk to other people and to Zoom with them, too. I'm having a great time now. I have 2 scheduled this week, and I did 2 or 3 last week. I'm Zooming with people, mostly people who've gotten Type 4, Type 4X. Sometimes it's also Parasetter. And when the new Reflexit comes out, maybe there'll be some people want to Zoom on that. But what it is I help the individual person who has one of our products to use it for themselves or for their clients in a way that is making it easier and better. And I have a good time doing it, and I'm getting better at it. So Zoom with me.
Yeah, Zoom with Joan. I mean, what could possibly be better than getting a Zoom session orienting you to a piece of apparatus from the inventor of that apparatus?
That's funny because that's what 2 of them said. Wow, the actual inventor. And although I'm not as proficient as a teacher might be who's doing it hopefully 6 hours a day, I know this device, and I know Pilates and a lot of other disciplines, Alexander and Feldenkrais and Traeger and many more that I've studied, in gyrotonic and bar and on in yoga. So I really can speak to it on many levels, and it's fun. I mean, that's the best thing that happened, that we can do these discussions, when someone's far away.
Yes. And even when they're close. Yeah. I have clients in the village who would rather work out at home on Zoom, and they've got their Type 4s and they do their stuff.
Yeah. No,
and
it
they
is
have a
true.
good time doing it.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Joan.
Thanks
for joining us. And I'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Pilates Goddess podcast. Music brought to you by Nerd Salad. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, especially if you liked it. And please like, share, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks.